Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to speak here. So I'm going to share my desktop now, and I need to hear from you whether that has worked or not. So this should be it. Can you see it? Um,
Yes.
okay, it's in view. Thank you very much. So we're going to talk a little bit about the CORSICA project. CORSICA is a rather ugly acronym for Creation of Early Music Corpora. That was a short-term scientific mission in cost action Early Muse. Early Muse is a sort of general survey of the state of early music research in Europe. Short-term scientific mission is really brief, and we had a workshop as a focus in May 2024. And we did a lot of work around that, which resulted in a final report of 73 pages, which you can find on Zenodo, and I hope you like browsing through that. On the photo, you see the entire team of 11 people we had. Now, first, maybe I need to clarify what we understand by early music, and that's just this. In the center of music, there is Johann Sebastian Bach, the famous German composer. What comes after him is classical music. What comes before him is so-called early music. Of course, this is a huge simplification, but that's maybe helpful if you're not so familiar with the area. Now, in the area of early music, we're particularly looking at polyphony, that is music in for multiple voices, and that's music that's, say, emerged around 1100 or maybe a little bit early. There are sizable quantities of polyphony already from the 13th century, and if we look at later centuries, we talk about hundreds of thousands of compositions and maybe millions of instances in the sources. So there's quite a lot of it. Now, our main problem was that we would like to conduct corpus research on that music, on early music, but there are not enough suitable encodings. So if you compare the numbers I just mentioned with what's available, let's say digitized and analyzable, then we see that there are corpora that consists of hundreds and maybe a few thousand compositions in the really big cases. And there are quite a few of them, and they all have their own technical and musicological approaches. So they may not be that they're not immediately compatible. But even if we put them together, we still have a rather small and rather biased subset of the surviving music. And the consequence of this is that the broad overview we would get, let's say, from a data-centered computational approach, the broad overview does not emerge from the data. And that's something we would like to amend. Now, we could take two routes for that. One would be a centralized approach, so you focus on the technology, standardization, and training, and that works for projects. If you can pull it off, that's great. And the Polish musical sources is a really nice example of that. But there is also another possible line, which I would call the ecological or inclusive approach, that focuses rather on the autonomy, the motivation, and the variety of practices that exist, and tries to order and systematize that. And one particular reason for doing so is that there's a very prominent role for citizen scientists in this field. There is a huge amount of people who create editions and encodings in their free time. And the resources for that, like the Coral Public Domain Library, are actually bigger than the scholarly resources. Now, Corsica explores this second route, which I would call the human-centered approach. That's what I've been teaching, human-centered design. So we see this as a human-centered design problem, and we let ourselves inspire by the big names from the area. David Benyon is a great inspiration for me. His book, Designing User Experience, is a great exploration of, let's say, how you can study first human tasks and motivations and then design the technology. And the really big name in the field is Donald Norman, the design of everyday things. So I think it's not so common to apply these ideas in the cultural heritage and the digital humanities world. And I hope this, if you're not so much interested in early music, there is something here that might interest you. So this is what we're going to do, but that you already heard that. So what I should do now is end my first presentation and hand over to Anna Plaksin here.
So, hello. Let me just share my screen and then I just move on. And yeah, let me switch this a bit and do it here. And so, as you heard already, my name is Anna Plaksin, and I will talk to you today about how to interrogate early music corpora. But when I speak about interrogating corpora, I mean the reuse, reaggregation, and sharing of pre-existing digital early music resources, especially music encodings. A key task in this is the mapping of the rationale present in the creation of a corpus with the goal of its interrogation. As I will show you in this talk, this involves the navigating the plurality of answers to just one question: what is structure and what is rendition? But to start from a corpus building perspective, digital humanities literature, not foreign to you here, usually distinguishes between research-driven corpus building and curation-driven corpus building. While research-driven corpora or data collections are clearly aimed at a certain research goal and will first and foremost support the creator's needs, curation-driven corpus building aims at an open-ended usefulness and long-term harmonization. Both strategies represent extremes on a wide range of possible decisions. To explain the role of a corpus in research, I'd like to refer to the term model as it has been introduced by German philosopher Herbert Stachowiak. A model is always a representation of something in a different medium. It is clearly not the original, and it is not a copy of the original. It is a reduction, as it represents only a subset of properties of the original. And it aims at a special context. It only represents the original for a certain use. A corpus in research is basically a model of the world we would like to gain knowledge of. And this means a corpus is always a reduced representation of something for a special context. Let's start by collecting a few possible scenarios for interrogating early music corpora. Use cases are not limited to academic use. For example, when finding resources for performance by certain criteria is needed, this is a need for many people. We can summarize these two scenarios here. They are mainly focused on metadata searches, as both aim at a certain content within a larger collection, like a piece of music that fits the needs of one particular choir. But machine-readable corpora do also allow analytical operations on content, either by performing content-based searches like melodic search or automated analysis, or they are used for training purposes. These activities do work well with corpora consisting of musical works, for example, as MIDI files or modern transcriptions in Music XML or MEI. But there are many other use cases that are not served by such a corpus because they either focus on musical sources instead of works, and because they are genuinely connected to the original notation in these sources. When you see this list of possible scenarios, please be sure all these are gathered here from real existing research interests. So, to bring a bit order in this complicated world, this brings us to the main feature of early music research, and that makes it, at least for me, both rewarding and challenging. It's diversity. From a corpus perspective, I'd like to navigate this diversity in 4 dimensions. First, do we want to interrogate about music documents, or the practice of making, creating, or writing music? In that first dimension, we deal with different entities: the musical work, a source, a modern edition, or just metadata. Every research question needs to be aware of its scope. What entity do I wish to focus on? In which notation? And how do I deal with normalization or emendation in a corpus? In the second dimension, we deal with a wide variety of representations of musical content: digital images of a source, uninterpreted original notation, interpreted digital notation, for example, with applied rules for imperfection and alteration as it is used in the notation of the 15th and 16th century. Or do we deal with transcriptions into modern notation or real modern editions? Regarding the scenarios I presented earlier, I hopefully showed that there is no single representation that is useful for everybody. In a third dimension, and this is very typical for early music, we work with source material in a wide variety of music notations at different states of development. In the creation and interrogation of music corpora, this challenges as so often the role of music notation versus the role of the music itself. Do I wish to analyze the music, for example, the counterpoint, or do I want to analyze pieces across different notations? Do I wish to learn how pieces of music were notated? Or do I want to compare different practices of music notation? Regarding corpus creation, do we want to take these different forms of notation into account? And do we treat these different forms of notations just as different shapes of notes and rests, or as different ways of understanding and writing music? And sometimes all these things do come together, as here in this case of John Dowland's lute songs, where you have lute tablature together with mensural notation. How do we deal with that? And with the fourth dimension, we need to take also the different readers into account, human readers as well as machine readers. I would like to explain this with an example. Quite often, music notation is unconventional, non-standard, or a bit weird. In this case of unconventional notation, it is often referred back to the digital image that was used as a source for the encoding, while the notation in the encoding is normalized. This not only touches the former dimension, but also articulates certain expectations on the interaction with the corpus. Silently, this assumes that the encoding focuses on the music instead of the notation, that the encoding is looked at and it's not processed. The agent looking at it can also read the content of digital images, which is up to this point, in most cases, still a human, and that unconventional notation is only of interest in a singular case or small number of cases, few enough to be inspected by humans. So there is hardly one corpus of early music that fits every research need. And therefore, the interrogation of music corpora includes also the evaluation of pre-existing resources, as well as the creation of corpora needs to take this diversity of questions and representations into account. But how can this diversity be navigated? Are there yet any solutions or at least advice? First, one strategy is documentation, because every analysis and the interpretation of its results depends on the context of the corpus and its digital representation. This means make the creation rationales visible, document normalization procedures and quality control measures, and describe the amount of heterogeneity, ideally everything in a machine-readable form. Other strategies can be achieved through automation, especially by improving processing and transformation capabilities. More sophisticated transformation procedures would allow the creation of derivatives from one representation to another, at least to a certain degree, and at least with parts of the features in the encoding, but not everything. File conversion is also a key topic, as it allows for a wide range of applications, just because different forms of encoding have different strengths and weaknesses. And ultimately, the goal would be to provide tooling that assists in the creation of corpora in non-standard notation, not just for experts, but also for wider audiences. And this was my part from here, and I would now like to hand over to Esperanza. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna, and hello, everybody. Good. So, as Anna has previously mentioned, the intended use of any given corpus, whether for performance, editorial, or analytical purposes, fundamentally determines its structure and content. As a historical musicologist specialized in computer-based analysis, I will be presenting scholarly corpora that provide encoded outputs suitable for computational analysis. I will briefly outline my trajectory and then discuss the broader evolution of such corpora. My direct engagement with Corpora began during the work of the Archive of Iberian Polyphony. This still incomplete repository comprises 130 works of Iberian origin created within a project about Iberian polyphonic music around 1500. It started in 2016 under the direction of João Pedro de Alvarenga. The archive offers critical editions in PDF format supplemented by rich metadata. However, it does not host encoded musical data. Despite this limitation, the archive laid the ground for a data set of Iberian and Franco-Flemish motets, circa 1500, which served to investigate stylistic tendencies in the repertories. In collaboration with Corey McKay from Marianopolis College, this data set was processed using an analysis software called J-Symbolic, enabling a feature-based comparative approach. The result were 175 motets encoded as MIDI files, which are available at Zenodo. Following this project, I joined the CREAM project, which I will mention later. And finally, my work with CORSICA has allowed me to reflect on all these aspects, on different aspects of digital corpora for early music. The examples that I'm going to show illustrate significant developments rather than offering an exhaustive catalog, and I will emphasize emerging trends and persistent challenges. The impulse of assemble comprehensive music corpora is deeply ingrained in musicology from its beginning. Scholars have sought to create systematic collection of music, for example, the monumental editions. And computational musicology mirrored this drive with the proliferation of big data strategies in the early 2000s. The field's momentum has increased with the widespread availability of digital editing tools, open access repositories, and more sophisticated analytical tools. The earliest scholarly initiatives emerged in the first decade of the 21st century. Much like the early creation of print corpora, they were uncoordinated, motivated by different objectives, and employing unique encoding formats. One prominent example is the Tomás Luis de Victoria database. Oops, sorry. Oh, yeah, here it is. Yes, so I was saying this is one of the examples. It's a personal project of Nacho Alvarez, and is oriented through performance. Launched in circa 2002 and significantly updated in 2009, the database focused on Victoria's music and then expanded to include other Spanish composers. Overall, the collection boasts over 1,500 encoded works. But these are not critical editions, and the encoding lack the metadata necessary for a thorough scholarly inquiry. Additionally, the project's reliance on Lillipond and MIDI formats complicates both interoperability and reusability. Another significant early venture was the computerized mensural music editing project, launched in 2006. And containing 59 encoded pieces, plus above 200 more available at the GitHub repository. And it was very important in approaching the intricacies of the mensural notation that Anna mentioned before. This obstacle has recently, it has a bespoke encoding format, which for a long time has been a barrier to compatibility. But this obstacle has very recently, been addressed with a plugin that translates the format. A similar solution for Lillipond compatibility is eagerly awaited. This disparate landscape began to shift with the launch of the Joscan Research Project in 2010, led by Jesse Rodan and Craig Sapp. The project prioritized interoperability and long-term reusability, now houses 902 works by Joscan, and his contemporaries, offering them in an array of formats. In addition to the widely used trio of music XML, MEI, and MIDI, the database also includes Humdrum, Muse Data, Note Array, and JSON Piano Roll, as well as MP3s and annotated PDFs, all complemented by an analytical tool. As a result, this project has come to represent a standard for an academically digital musical corpus. Other efforts soon followed this model. For example, Tasso in Music, directed by Emiliano Ricciardi and Craig Sapp, launched in 2015, has assembled a collection of 778 musical settings of Tasso's poetry. Furthermore, the 1520s project, led by Ben Ory and Craig Sapp and launched in 2019, contains a meticulously curated selection of 400 musical works from circa 1510 and 1514. All of them are provided in MEI, Music XML, MIDI, and Humdrum, alongside an exemplary metadata and analytical tools as well. Such undertakings exemplifies the rise of highly interoperable and well-documented digital corpora. A significant group of projects, a significant group of projects have been developed at the Centre d'études supérieures de la Renaissance and Haverford College under the direction of Philip Hendricks and Richard Friedman. They are the Lost Voices, 2012, Cream Citations, 2018, and Gesualdo Online, 2019. Rather than offering a multiplicity of formats, these projects provide only MEI and PDF files. They are more focused on sophisticated analytical functions that MEI really provides. And this is very interesting because although current technologies for translating MEI into other symbolic formats remain complex, choosing MEI underscores its importance, its growing importance as a preferred format for analysis. Finally, I would draw attention to eLaute, launched in 2023, which stands as the most ambitious project to date. It aims to create a digital edition of lute tablatures in German cipher from 1450 to 1550. The team is led by Katharina Schöning and others, and the project seeks to produce a corpus of nearly 2,000 pages. Apart from using the latest technological standards, it's very interesting because it has a good balance between scholarly and performance-related aims. And also, this is connected with Frans said at the beginning. It has a focus on public engagement, particularly through collaborative editing features. This progress represents, as I said, a move towards a standardization and accessibility in corpus creation as an issue systematically articulated by Julie Cumming and Corey McKay in a seminal article that you have here from 2018. Ideally then, a digital corpus should consist of a representative selection of works curated for a specific scholarly objective, systematically edited and encoded. It should provide symbolic files in as many formats as feasible, enriched with comprehensive metadata. This level of openness and structure aligns, in addition, with the FAIR principles, so making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, thereby ensuring its long-term relevance and usability. And I will pass the floor to Frans now.
Yes, so I'm going to share my other deck of slides. We have heard a lot about why humans want to, whether they are scholars or citizen scientists or music lovers, might want to edit or encode music. So my talk is specifically focusing on the human aspects of the whole process. Um, so we've seen a variety of approaches and motivations, and actually human-centered design is about exploring and understanding that variety of human motivations, values, aims, etc. And the aim of human-centered design by itself is to develop high-quality interactive systems that fit with people and their ways of living. And I see, let's say, the digital environment for corpus studies or digital editions as, let's say, a very big interactive system. If we go back to theory, then what in human-centered design is the objective is the creation of people-technology systems. People and technologies working together seamlessly to perform certain activities within a certain context. That's what the illustration, which comes from Benyon on the right, demonstrates. And the seamless aspect is really important, and it might relate to, and also you probably have heard about, or maybe even read, Daniel Kahneman is thinking fast and slow. You could say we have complex tasks, namely the understanding of music that ask a lot of your brain focus. Um, at the same time, while you're doing that, you also need to do other tasks, and the other tasks need to be routine. So creation of corpora is something that actually should be a sort of a routine, should go easy, while you can focusing on the difficult task, namely the musicological or the practical musical question. In order to understand how you can create such a seamless system, the first thing is to look into the humans, and later on from that go to technology. That's what we actually did for a little bit in our project in in CORSICA. We did this in two ways. We did this by interviewing people who were involved in digital editing and corpus creation, and we created something called personas. And I want to give you a little bit of an insight in what we did. So the interviews we did were with 6 musicologists or professionals and 3 citizen scientists. Interestingly, what they usually do, where they see themselves is as editors of creators of digital editions. So digital editing is what they're focusing on, and the encodings, the ones we need for the corpus research, are kind of the byproducts of their activity. And so there is a continuum here, and we need to respect the one in order to also maybe be able to do the other. And I think that it was very clear in Esperanza's talk. It's a sort of mixed world, the editing for and corpus analysis world. So those nine participants, they belong to a number of communities of practice, each with their own favorite encoding language and their software tools. And there is a group of those communities of practice. One, I could say, focus on humdrum, which is an analytical encoding and rather in the moving in a sort of analytical direction. The Music Encoding Initiative, a community of practice, is rather source oriented. So start with the source and go from there. MuseScore is a community very much active on the internet where digital editions of all sorts are produced. And Lillipond is a fourth important community, which is rather more into digital typesetting, LaTeX-like approaches to music. And of course, as Esperanza has shown, there is a large amount of overlap, but there are also kind of different philosophies even of editing and encoding. Now, those participants we've talked to are generally quite happy with their platforms, and they may have minor comments and or complaints, but they clearly want to stick with what they are, even if they are potentially interested in contributing to something bigger than that. If you look into their motivations, why am I doing this? Then we first of all see discovery. Almost all of them mention discovery. We discover new things and we want to share those discoveries with the others. That might even be a form of altruism because, well, the others have given us things, beautiful music, editions. We want to give back to the community. One person even spoke of obsessive collecting, wanted to have it all and understand it all. motivation can also be, well, some of the good editions are really expensive to use. So maybe we should go back to sources and create our own, hopefully equally good editions. And there are people who want to leave something behind. So maybe with the exception of the fourth motivation, what we see is that we're talking about activities that are deeply meaningful to the participants. They're doing this because it enhances their lives. They also have concerns. They share, but if they share, they still feel an ownership, and they want that to be respected and recognized and acknowledged. There is no wish at all among the participants we talk to for material reward. Nobody wants to earn money doing this, but they want to be respected and acknowledged. Some of them are a bit hesitant about what are the best possible platforms for publication. One quite interesting suggestion was, well, people create editions and encodings for a reason. And after that, what do they do with that? Maybe they should put it on some sort of a dumpster of encodings that are no longer used, but could be picked up by others, maybe further developed or at least used for their own projects. All of them have concerns about quality or focus on getting the quality of their work as best as they can. Usually what they miss is good access to primary sources. So there's one source of a piece that they can access, but the others are maybe hard to get to. And they have often developed for themselves simple informal guidelines, or in some cases they follow more formalized guidelines from the profession. Simple guideline is reversibility, traceability, and transparency, which I think are very important key concepts of high quality encodings. Now, this is just a few things that emerged from the interviews. Overall, there are some takeaways that we can apply to the design of the encoding environment. One is that it is important to preserve and connect those existing communities of practice. The other thing is to respect the motivations and make sure that people keep motivated doing things. Concerns about ownerships are definitely something that we need to address. If we, let's say, want to provide support that should often go beyond the technical, helping people with access, with publication platforms, maybe with providing guidelines for how to do the work. That's so much for the interviews. The next thing we did was creation of personas. Personas are concrete representations of different types of people that use the system. Are going to use the system. We created 5 of them in the workshop. None of them were musicologists. All of them were citizen scientists. And you can see here 2 mentioned. One was Dirk and the other was Elizabeth. We created a little background for them. We said something about their motivation and frustrations. On the right, you can see what the complete persona for Elizabeth looked like. Now, what do you do with the persona? It gives you a perspective from within the system. You imagine how somebody works with a system, what somebody experienced there. So it's a very interesting way of exploring the implications of what you design and how does that affect aims, motivations, and frustrations, maybe also. Sorry, maybe I should put it in a slightly different way. By exploring those aims, motivations, and frustrations, we can discover what a system should afford and what sort of things it should evade. Especially what study of personas does is to see the importance of diversity. Those personas may have slightly different aims with deep consequences for the system's design. One of the funny things that happened in our discussion is that we imagined a romantic relationship between those 2 personas that we had developed separately. And on the one hand, this was just sort of a funny thing that happened in the workshop, but on the other hand, it very quickly helped us to even gain a deeper insight in the place that music encoding and editing might have in the personal but also in the social lives of the contributors, how they strengthened and developed their relationship because they were involved in the process. Now, as a quick summary of human-centered design, I would mention a concept that comes from Donald Norman. It's the concept of the 2 gulfs, the gulf of execution and the gulf of evaluation. If we use a technology, first gulf we encounter is the gulf of execution. We have aims and we need to translate that into the operation of the system. Then the second golf is the golf of evaluation. We need to evaluate what the system does in order to see whether our goals are reached. And those golfs can be pretty wide. And if they are wide, and which they are in our field, then there are two ways of closing or narrowing that gulf. One is training, bringing people closer to the technology, or the other is bringing the technology closer to people, and that's to help negotiating aims and needs within the system. For example, helping them with conversion procedures. What we did in our project is try to elaborate that second option. So to create a situation or to imagine a situation where there's less need for participants to motivate their practices and also to keep their intrinsic motivation. And that concludes my presentation. And thank you very much for listening.
So continuing on the theme of sort of the participants and how to best take advantage of their generosity. When we think about models for community contribution in general, often we think of a sort of concentric circles model where there's a small number of people coordinating, a small number of people doing a lot of contribution, then a sort of larger number of people doing less contribution but some, and then a sort of active user community, and then a more passive user community, also centered around a common set of goals. It's probably apparent by now that what we have in this context is multiple communities, and particularly we can characterize them sort of as the practitioner communities, the people who are making music with the scores that are produced. We have the scholarly communities. I've put traditional in scare quotes. What I mean is the users and creators of critical editions, of the monumental editions. And then we've kind of created out for ourselves an extra community of the digital and computational musicologists. And what's clear is there's diversity. Obviously, there's diversity within these groups. These are broad brushstrokes, but there's a lot of diversity between them in terms of goals, in terms of needs, and in terms of scale. So one of the reasons for us getting together is that the practitioner communities are very large and contribute quite a lot. The digital musicology communities are quite small. And what this means is, so what Fenlon calls an oyster model of sort of ever more sort of small numbers, high contribution communities within a single community, doesn't really work that well for us because we're a plurality of communities not fully overlapping and with a multiplicity of gains. As Frans has said already, there is something a little bit strange about these models anyway, because especially major contributors are slightly outliers for their own communities, and they will have their own motivations that are a little bit different often. But it still raises this question of how we make additions that are intended for one use or one community useful more broadly, and particularly for us in the digital and computational musicology community. And I'm going to very quickly outline three approaches that we've been working with. One is adaptation. And in that case, we take something that already exists. So for example, the A-Lauter project is hoping to do maybe 2,000 pages of transcription. The Ecom Loop Music project from 20 years ago managed about 1,000 or so pieces. But in the paper mail-out for the Lute Society of the UK, John Robinson was preparing lute tablatures to send out to the members. Every time they sent out a newsletter, there'd be one sent out over decades. We have 10,000 transcriptions that he sent out on paper. And what we did was we went to him and asked if we could use the files that he'd used to typeset the music, converted them to MEI, put them on GitHub, got him to release them under an open license. And then we can layer extra things in. We can in future hope to put more metadata into, maybe even apply scholarly apparatus onto the files. But this approach requires the effort of taking something that already exists and adapting it in the expectation that that is far easier and less effort than starting from scratch. Another approach is to involve ourselves more in the corpus creation process itself. Especially if you're coordinating the creation of a corpus, there are certain workflows, certain tasks that are generic, that perhaps we could support with tools. And if we make those tools helpful, people might use them. And if they use them, we might also benefit from being able to ensure that things like metadata encoding and so on are at the standards that make them more broadly useful. And this is a strategy being taken by our colleagues in Vienna, David Weigel and Werner Goebel, for a project starting next year, the Let's Encode project. The third approach, which is a little bit more vague, is that I think one might get the impression from some of these presentations that because there's a huge volume of music being generated in the amateur communities, that we think that essentially these communities provide us with music, we provide them with sort of expertise in some sense, digital tools, and no music. And it is sort of worth our while sort of saying that we have been editing music, there are critical editions, and there is this question of if there weren't the barriers of them being expensive, in enormous, hard to navigate formats, not optimized for performers, whether there are things that we can do to those that would benefit the performer, the practitioner communities as well. So that's something we've been working on investigating. So beginning to round us out, I think what's clear is we need to know more about all the communities involved, or as many of them as possible, in terms of the needs and ambitions and wants. That includes the academic communities, but it also includes the communities that aren't currently creating digital content at all, so that we can work out what commonalities exist, how we can work together. As Francis said, one of the things that clearly won't work is asking people who are doing incredible things with very specific workflows to change to something completely different. So our tooling has to be more of the supportive sort, little bits that help make things work together, that will help make a certain amount of commonality between these different approaches. One thing that's a big gulf, as Anna made clear, is metadata. It's very difficult to join things together if we don't understand what it is we've got in each corpus. And if we take a piece or an element out of a corpus, we need to still know what it is. So we need to know not just the sort of cataloging metadata of what work this is. We need to know who created it, something of the editorial process, what sources they had access to ideally. And that requires us to have agreed schema, but also usable tools and easy ways to put that information out there. Crucially, we need to know what we're allowed to do with files. We need to have licensing information. And finally, I think what is clear to most of us is that there are benefits in the digital beyond the paper editions for all the communities involved. But they're not currently necessarily apparent or easily accessible with the software that's available. And so benefits that accrue to all of the communities will be greater if we can actually make tools and digital edition software that actually makes their lives easier, makes their performance and use better. And with that, hopefully I've got us on track time-wise. Like, thank you from Frans, Anna, Esperanza, and myself, and go to any questions or discussion.